The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Welcome to Gate City Chronicles. I'm Kevin Avard, your host, and today we're going to be talking with an author, and I believe one of the topics is going to be about Lafayette, but we're just getting to know each other, so I'd like to welcome Dorothea Jensen.
That's right.
On the show.
You got it right.
Welcome. That's a first.
Yes.
I usually have to apologize. So we were talking a little bit off air. You've been writing for some time now.
I have.
And you've traveled around the world quite a bit.
Well, I've lived, the only places I've actually lived outside of the United States were in Brazil and in Holland.
And in Holland.
But then we've lived in, many different places in the United States. But we've been in New Hampshire for 25 years, and we're never leaving.
Wonderful. Welcome to the sanctuary of New Hampshire.
Yes.
The Granite State, live free or die.
Absolutely.
So
yes.
Interesting that your husband lived in Fallujah, or he was.
No, it's my son.
Your son.
My son. Yes, he served there. He was in the State Department.
Yeah.
He ended up getting an award for bravery, but he keeps it buried in his bedroom so nobody sees it. He doesn't. I keep thinking he ought to put it on a shirt.
And he's well.
He's very well. Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes. Yes.
So your husband kind of gave us the clue that you wrote at least 9 books already?
Yes. Well, the first 3 I wrote with a friend. I co-authored, and we did it under a pseudonym. And so, but they're still around.
Yep.
And then I wrote this book, which is called The Riddle of Pencroft Farm, and that's about the American Revolution. And it's still in print. It's been in print for 28 years. It's never gone out of print, which is very unusual, trust me. And I think it's because they use it in schools around the country. When kids are studying the American Revolution, it's really fun to go on websites for schools, and they'll say, well, children, we're studying the American Revolution now, and you need to pick one of these books to read as extra information. And one is Johnny Tremaine, and the other one is The Riddle of Pencroft Farm. So
now,
that's very exciting.
Why that?
Because it tells a lot of information about the American Revolution. And historical fiction is a wonderful way to give kids a real feel for what the times were like.
Okay.
The whole purpose of it is to make it come alive for kids, so they really understand what was going on and how people felt. Because of course it was a civil war as well as a war against England. Because something like John Adams said, who knows if he was right, but he said that only 1/3 of the population supported the war.
Because they were loyalists?
And then 1/3 were loyalists and 1/3 were neutral, and we're just sort of waiting on the fence.
To see who's going to
see who was going to win.
To see who'd be, then they'd be the
Yeah,
loyalists
we
to
know
one
people like
side.
that,
And, which is, they call them independents or moderates.
Yes, that's right. Certainly here in New Hampshire.
Just kidding, honestly, no. But that's interesting. I actually, maybe a few months ago, maybe about 8 months ago, I went through the series of John Adams.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it was on TV, and I'm glued.
Yes,
my favorite stuff. We got Netflix now, and so I'm going through all the World War II documentaries,
Yes,
Vietnam's, and the rise of the Third Reich and all that stuff, and I'm just glued.
I know.
What an amazing difference from then till now, as far as the way people think, and just the times.
I know.
But you had to do a lot of research in order to. So what did you research for that?
Well, this is the new book that just came out, The Bus from Lafayette. And a bus, I should tell you before we say anything else, is a kiss. A bus is like a kiss on the cheek, one of these kind of kisses. And so I read, to research this book, luckily I set it in Hopkinton, New Hampshire, and so there were a lot of resources that were available to me that were not available when I wrote this book, because this is set in Pennsylvania and I was living in Minnesota, so it was trickier, and there was no internet then. But I was able to go into the New Hampshire Historical Society and actually read the newspapers from Concord that were published while he was in New Hampshire. Did
you go to Portsmouth at all by any chance?
No, he went to Portsmouth.
Yes, he did.
Definitely.
He was
But he
a
actually
Mason.
went to Portsmouth the year before he came. Well, maybe I should explain what he was doing here first.
Sure.
You have to understand that the way that I got interested in this in the first place is I met a woman who had been, her great-grandmother had been a little girl who had welcomed Lafayette in 1824. She was 7, and she had been selected to be the one in her town, which was in Northampton, Massachusetts, to give him a bouquet of flowers. And he kissed her on the cheek.
The bus.
So that was the bus. So then the great-grandmother then kissed the mother of the woman I'd met. She was elderly, and then she had been kissed. So I immediately went up to her and said, right here, Rita, and she kissed me. So that was the first that I actually...
That's cool.
Yeah, this was actually the first that I heard that Lafayette had come back 50 years after the Revolution had begun. He was invited by President Monroe to come back, because he was the only general that was still alive at that time in the 1820s, because he was only 19 when he became a major general. And all the other major generals, or any kind of generals, were all in their 40s and 50s or whatever. So he was the only one who was still alive. And he had been through a horrendous experience with the French Revolution, and he'd been in prison for 5 years. His wife came this close to being beheaded as an aristocrat. And he lost most of his money. So he was just sort of living out his life over there, and he was invited by President Monroe to come and tour the United States. And so he did, and he was here for 14 months, and he went 6,000 miles. There were 24 states at the time, and he went to every single state. And what happened in every state was pretty similar to what happens in my book, because he was like a rock star. And every time he would hit towns, there'd be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people who would show up. So they estimate that a third or a fourth of the American population, which was about 3 million people, the third was 3 million people, saw him while he was here. And he was just this living link with history, because he'd been a very close friend of George Washington, who of course was gone by then. And he just did so much for our country, and people were just thrilled to have him there. So then, once I found out that he'd come back 50 years after the Revolution, I started reading all about his farewell tour, and come to find out, he went right past my house.
Did he really?
So...
In
yeah,
Hopkinton?
In Hopkinton.
Or Kentucky?
Yeah, I live right on Route 103, and he went right by my house. I wasn't in it at the time, but...
No, of course not. But once in a while on a blue moon, you can hear the horses
Yes, you
as
can.
they go by.
So
now, obviously, this is fiction.
Mm-hmm. Well, parts of it
Parts
are.
that are fiction, but based on historical fact.
Mm-hmm.
And are there any heroes that we should know about,
Well,
than Lafayette?
Other than Lafayette. Well, the main character is actually a girl who's 14. And the way the book is structured is she really doesn't know that much about Lafayette. She's in a sort of a difficult situation, because her mother has died, sort of a downer. Her mother died the year before of tuberculosis, and her father then married her mother's older sister, which was rather common in those days, to marry, when your wife died, to marry a sister.
Kin, right.
And I had come across this situation in my own genealogy from about that same time, and I remember thinking at the time it must have been very confusing for the kids to suddenly have your aunt become your mother. So that's what's happened in this story. And not only that, but the aunt, who's the stepmother, was a Boston old maid schoolmistress, and so she has very definite ideas about how 14-year-old girls should behave, and they're nothing like what the girl Clara wants to do: ride a side saddle, that kind of thing. You're not supposed to swim in the pond,
Right.
not all the fun stuff. No playing baseball, all the stuff that she liked to do. So that is her conflict, among other things. But the other conflict she has is that she's got red hair, and so people tease her. You know, other kids tease her, and so she has developed a plan to turn her hair black. And so that's sort of the situation.
And somehow Lafayette is in the mix.
He is. So over the course
And a kiss.
and a kiss. And a kiss definitely takes place, but I'm not going to give it away.
No, wonderful.
But yes, so throughout the story, she's hearing stories about Lafayette from people she meets, from her family. One of the people that she meets is kind of interesting, and this was a true story. When Lafayette dedicated the Bunker Hill Memorial, and there were some, you can't get a handle on how many people there were there, but because every place has something different, but there were between 100,000 and 200,000 people that went to Boston when he was there. Now, not all of them, you know, crowded around Bunker Hill, but there were lots and lots of people to see him do this. And one of the people was a veteran, a Revolutionary War veteran who was probably 75, something like that, from Vermont, who went down to Boston to see the Bunker Hill Memorial be dedicated, or it was the cornerstone was laid, is what was happening. Well, somehow or other, he missed his ride back to Vermont, and he was standing around wondering how he was going to get home, and lo and behold, this carriage shows up, and it's two guys from Concord, New Hampshire, who have come down to pick up Lafayette because he's coming to Concord. He's coming to New Hampshire next. And they got there. One of them was named Amos Parker, and he was the editor of a paper in Concord. The other one was a guy named Nathaniel, whose last name I can't remember right now, but he was the regular coach driver between Concord and Boston. And he'd bragged to everybody along the route that he was going to be driving Lafayette. Well, what happened is the Massachusetts governor suddenly decided that no way was Lafayette going to be delivered to the state line with New Hampshire in a New Hampshire coach by New Hampshiremen. So he said,
I see where you're going.
Okay, so you can imagine what happened is that these two guys, they were furious because they were supposed to be driving Lafayette. And so at that point, they meet this old veteran who says, do you suppose you guys can give me a ride as far as Concord? So you can imagine what happened.
Right?
Everybody
That's
thought.
Lafayette in there.
And anyway, Amos Parker wrote a very funny book about his experience. And what happened is, you know, they weren't thinking about anything like that was going to happen. They're driving along, and suddenly they see, I can't remember what the first town is out of Massachusetts, but it was, or in Massachusetts.
Lowell or
Chelmsford? It was one
or
of Malden.
okay. Yeah.
Anyway, suddenly they see this huge crowd of people waiting for them. And as they get closer, they all start shouting, hooray for Lafayette! And they throw flowers, and the bands are marching and stuff, so they have to stop the coach. And then Amos Parker had to stand up and say, well, actually, you know, this isn't actually Lafayette. But he is a Revolutionary War veteran, so let's give him a hand, folks. And he had to make that speech something like 25 times before they got to the Massachusetts, the border with New Hampshire. So she happens to be in, downtown Hopkinton Village when this veteran comes through. I don't know if he ever actually went through Hopkinton, but I figure that it was on the way to Vermont from Concord, so he may have.
How long did it take you to write this?
Oh, you don't even want to ask that question, because I got the idea for it in 1997. That's when I met the woman who gave me the kiss from Lafayette. But I wasn't working on it the whole time. I was raising children and, you know, things like that. But
somebody can learn a lot about Lafayette.
Yes.
Just like this other book.
Yes, they can learn. So Clara, we learn along with Clara everything that he did for us for the Revolution. And I mean, in many ways, you can say if it weren't for Lafayette, we would not have won the Revolution, because he helped keep the French support going. And,
Which was critical.
Yes, yes. 'Cause without the French alliance, we would not have been able
So
to.
it wasn't Benjamin Franklin that kept that going.
Oh, no, he wasn't on the spot. He
Right.
did it in France.
He was in France, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he did it. He was mucking around with, the king and the people.
Someone's
got
to do it, right?
Right, yeah. But in the field, for example, there was the Battle of Rhode Island when the Americans were trying to kick the British out of Rhode Island, which they were occupying, and there was this brouhaha because the French admiral who came. This is when the French support first arrived, and this is one of the first things they were supposed to do together. But nobody's too clear,
who's in charge
or what the plan is, and General Sullivan, who was a New Hampshire general, was so furious because it was D'Estaing, and that was the French commander, and the French commander he sort of left. He was there for the initial assault, but they got sort of into a fight over who. He wanted to unload his men before Sullivan, and egos were involved, and they were not exactly on the same page. So Sullivan was so furious because D'Estaing sailed off and went to Boston with his fleet that he wrote really nasty letters about the French, and so it was sort of up to Lafayette to smooth things over. So he went and sort of smoothed things over with the French and then smoothed things over with the American commanders. So,
did you watch the movie The Patriot?
I did.
Now, was that disappointing to you?
I did not like it. I did not like it. It's been many years since I watched it. But I felt as if they sensationalized things that shouldn't have been sensationalized, and it wasn't that accurate. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
When a historian sees stuff like this, I just wonder what goes through your mind.
Well, I mean, you can see what they were trying to do. They were trying to make it as sensational as possible. And I can't remember exactly what was so upsetting. Maybe it was Bannister Tarleton, or I can't remember. But they had them lock a bunch of women and children in the church and set the church on fire. Yeah. I've never certainly come across that.
I haven't heard of anything like that.
I think they were just trying to make it look as
they were brutal as possible.
Yeah. And I think that one thing that I really believe is that things are always much more complicated and complex in the past than you think. I mean, if you look at the war from the British point of view, although I don't really talk about that in here, I do a little bit in here, but they reasoned that they had just incurred a huge war debt because they were, quote, protecting the American frontier in the French and Indian War. And that's when they started taxing the Americans. They felt it was perfectly reasonable to try and get the money back that they had spent in America. Well, I mean, the fact of the matter was that it was sort of a world war. The Americans didn't start it, but the main thing is, up until that point, all of the taxes had been raised by colonial assemblies. And even though many colonies had royal governors that were sent over here, they really couldn't do too much because they had to rely on the state assemblies to vote the money. So that really controlled what they could do. So when the British started taxing America, not only was it the principle of the thing, the taxation without representation is tyranny, but the fact of the matter was that suddenly was going to put money into the hands of the royal governors who could maybe do whatever they wanted. So that was another reason that they were very much up in arms.
And I think it was only a penny on the dollar or something to that effect.
It was, it was interesting because actually the tea that they were selling was actually going to be cheaper than the tea that people were already buying. But
it's the principle.
It was that worm in the apple. There was no way they were going to let them get away with that. So
I bet you had fun researching this.
I did. But it's interesting because, to me anyway, I get the feeling sometimes that it's sort of like panning for gold, because you have to read a lot of really boring stuff sometimes that doesn't get you anywhere. until you suddenly come across a little teeny shiny gold piece that you know you can really use in your story. Like for instance, I mean I didn't have to read that much to find this, but I had a book on general stores in the 19th century, and they were quite different than what we have today, because literally many people traded at the stores, and it wasn't that you went in and gave them a credit card or even money. You would bring your strawberry jam that you would make, and you'd give it to them, and then you could buy stuff. But you could also, if there was a third person, like if you wanted to have a dress made, and there was a local seamstress, you could bring your strawberry jam, give it to the storekeeper, and then he would put the credit for this other person. And that's how you paid the other person. So it was a very complicated thing. So I bought this book from Old Sturbridge Village about general stores. And in it, I found a reference to something called a Simeon's lead comb. And this was made, around 1800, a little bit later. And it was supposed to turn red hair black. Well, of course, it was probably just the oxidation from the comb. And so I have Clara sees an advertisement in one of the Concord papers for the Simeon's lead comb. So she's sure that this is going to change her life. So, but that's the kind of thing. Yeah, I'm just reading along, and I suddenly came across Simeon's lead comb, and I thought, oh,
that'll fit.
Yeah, she's a redhead, and she doesn't like being a redhead.
Oh, no.
So anyway, so I did have a lot of fun.
It sounds like it. You made a little statement. I said, well, was it exciting writing a book of this nature? And you said something to the effect, well, it's like being told you're pregnant.
Yes, that's right. Takes a long, long time.
Yeah, but that excitement kind of wears off
It
a little
does.
bit in
It
the process
does.
until the grand day of
When it's finally
when it's
released.
finally
Yeah, and we had a really fun launch party for it.
When did you do that?
In April 22nd is when it came out, and I had a costume made in the style of 1825, which was really fun. And I had a couple of friends who played the violin, and they had costumes. And so they played, there's a lot of music referred to in this book, dance tunes and other things. So they played a lot of the dance tunes from the book. And then for the big finish, there's something else I have to tell you.
We got plenty of time.
Okay, here is the deal. What you may not know is that when Lafayette came to New Hampshire in 1825, on the 22nd of June in 1825, which would be 191 years tomorrow, there was a huge reception for him in Concord. And there was a parade. He visited the legislature. He came out of the State House, and there were 200 Revolutionary War soldiers lined up there to meet him. I think this happened everywhere. But, and he actually remembered some of them. He apparently was one of these people who remembers names like crazy, and he, everybody was crying. It was, quite an emotional scene. But for the entertainment, somebody had written a song, and this song, see if I have it in here, I'm not sure. Yeah, here it is. Somebody had written a song, and in this song that was sung in Concord 191 years ago tomorrow, is the very first time New Hampshire was called this.
That looks like it says the Granite State.
That's exactly what it says. It had never been called that before until this song was sung for Lafayette, in honor of Lafayette.
Is that in the history book somewhere? Or
It's in my book. It's in history books. Sure, you can find it. Yeah. And so what I did is I sang the song. At my launch party, I sang the song. So that was a lot of fun. And then for the big finish, we did a Virginia reel. Most of the people got up and danced it. So this isn't the whole, this is not all of the lyrics. This is just 3 verses. It goes on and on and on. But I've posted all the rest of the lyrics on my website, which is abusfromlafayette.com.
Say that again, a bus?
Abusfromlafayette.com. That's just the title of the book. .com. That's
Wonderful.
it. Yeah, makes
So
it
you
easy.
can get more information about that. Where can you buy the book?
Well, I've got links to every place you can possibly ever buy it on my website.
So
But
Amazon,
love it.
but you go to the website and people can find
Yes,
it.
yep.
And all the other books. Are all
Yeah.
your other books similar in nature?
No, I've got many different kinds of books.
But I mean, as far as historical?
The first three I wrote were sort of romantic comedies, fake Jane Austen books. So they were historical, yes, but they weren't really very serious history. Then I wrote 4 books that are in verse. They're poetry. They're about some elves. They're Christmas books, and they're all in rhyme, and they're about a group of 8 elves called the Izzy Elves, and their names are all Izzy. There's Tizzy, Quizzy. Quizzy does all the puzzles and games, and Frizzy is the one who cuts and curls the doll's hair, and that kind of thing. So I've done 4 of those. I've got 4 more to go. And I started out and I put my grandchildren in them, and then more grandchildren arrived, so I have to keep going to put them in it. And then Riddle of Pencroft Farm.
Do you have some more projects in mind already, or?
Yes, I'm working on a book right now that's set in Massachusetts in 1675. And I figured out the other day, I hadn't really thought about this, but I figured out the other day that when that one is published, I will have written things that take place in 5 different centuries. And then I say, what was I thinking? Because every time you have to really.
What's going on in 1675?
King Philip's War, which
one of those most popular wars, of course.
Well, it was actually the bloodiest in terms of the percentage of the population that was killed. It was like 10% of the colonists and 10% of the Indians were killed, which is a much larger percentage than any other war we've ever been involved in. But
I must claim great ignorance of this one because I knew nothing about this one.
That's why I'm writing the book. But I also found out that my direct ancestors started the war. They were fired the very first shots, and so their name was Salisbury. They had just come over from England, and they'd gotten a land grant or purchased some land in Swansea, Massachusetts, and they were out looking around in the forest trying to decide where they were going to build their house. And at that point, it's a very interesting time in our history because it was the generation down from Massasoit and the Pilgrims who got along pretty well. And these are their children. And by that time, the young Indian kids they started understanding that the British were not going to leave. They
weren't just visitors.
No, they were coming over and over and over. So there was a lot of unrest, and they were sort of spoiling for a fight, and I mean probably for a very good reason.
I look forward to it. So the name of this book is A Bus from Lafayette.
That's right.
By Dorothea Jensen. I'm so glad you came on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you very much.
Nice to meet you.
Get the book. It sounds interesting. Until next week, thanks for watching Gate City Chronicles. Thank you for watching Gate City Chronicles, and we want to thank our sponsor, Avard Cleaning. They've been a sponsor for quite a few years now, and we appreciate them being a sponsor. And if you want to be a guest on our show, contact accessnashua@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your story. Until next week, thanks for watching.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.